Thanks for sharing your time with me on Undoing We. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to share it with a friend and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you're looking for some more support, be sure to grab my guide, 5 Strategies for Better Communication During Divorce and Other Life Transitions. The link is going to be in the show notes. And remember, no matter what you do today, do something special for yourself because you deserve it. Hello. Today, we're going to talk about a really difficult topic, and it's something that doesn't apply to every family, but when it does apply to your family, it has a huge impact. And what I want to talk about today, and the guest expert I have from a past recording to talk about how to deal with the loss of a young child if you have other children and need to continue to parent. So I have an expert on in this area. Her name is Michele Benyo. She's a dear friend of mine, and she is absolutely passionate about helping families deal with this. She's a certified grief recovery specialist, an early childhood educator, and a parent coach, and she founded Good Grief Parenting. And Michele does that from a place of her heart. Her own son passed away, died of cancer, and her 3-year-old daughter said to her, "Mommy, half of me is gone." And not only was that heartbreaking as a parent, but Michele realized, despite all her expertise and her areas in work, in her time and passion in working with kids of this age, she really struggled with how to do this. So she did all of the research for you. And her goal now is to really help parents who are dealing with this very unique situation to be able to go on and move through life and to deal with how to parent their surviving children. The other thing that I want to stress, and Michele and I talk about this a little bit in the interview, is that it can seem like the death of a child increases the risk of divorce for the parents. And Michele says, really, that's a myth, that often it's a test for the parental relation or for the spousal relationship, definitely. And it is a test as a parent, obviously. And it's a devastating, heartbreaking, tragic occurrence. But in itself, the death of a child is not going to contribute to the increase of the divorce rate within that population. However, if the relationship wasn't really solid before, or if the partners now, if the adults now have different goals and different expectations, and one partner may move through the grief faster than the other, and if there isn't that compassion and that ability to work together as a couple and as parents, that can definitely add stress to the relationship. So I want you to keep in mind, this is an earlier recording. So you may notice that I look a little different, but I think that this is really important for all parents just to be aware of this, because, it is a tragic and heartbreaking situation, and it does have an impact on how you're going to continue to parent your children, whether you stay together or whether you are through the divorce, in the divorce, or the divorce is in your future.
Okay, well, thank you, Mardi. Really happy to be here with you and your listeners. And I'm the founder of Good Grief Parenting, which grew out of my personal need as a parent who and it's actually been 22 years now. This isn't a recent thing that happened to me. I had 2 young children. I was an early childhood parent educator here in Minnesota. Every school district has that program. And I was, a young mom with 2 kids, and I thought my life was perfect. I got to go to work every day as this early childhood parent educator, working with families of children my ages. And then my son got cancer. He was 3.5 or 4 years old. His sister was 15 months old. I was trained as an early childhood parent educator, but I did not know how to walk my family through this this loss of dreams, which was a phrase I'd actually been introduced to in my training and found so interesting, never believing or never realizing that soon that would be me. And so we walked for 2.5 years through my son's cancer. When he died at the age of not quite 7, his sister was 3.5, and she actually said to me, "Mommy, half of me is gone." Wow. And so I was just faced with, she was all through his illness and the years after, she's been my case study, just really showing me how young siblings are impacted by these kinds of events in families. And when she said that to me, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anything about how to help her with that. And I thought, well, I'm in the field, I'll find resources, but I couldn't find any. And so for the last, 22 years, I've been walking this journey as the mom of what I call a sibling by heart, because she's still a sibling, even though she grew up without her brother. And I really had to learn in those early years what that meant to her as a bereaved sibling. And as it happens, my husband and I went through a divorce within the year after my son died. It wasn't why we divorced. That's kind of I think it's a misconception. I think families maybe, break after the loss of a child, but if their marriage was not as strong as it could have been in the first place, and that was the case with ours. But so I raised this young girl as a bereaved sibling with just me, spent time with her dad, but didn't live with him. And that became good grief parenting. Everything that I learned about the needs of a sibling after child loss are what I want to give to families that are experiencing this same thing. So that's what brought me here.
Wow. And that's got to be kind of a double difficulty for a parent, I'm guessing, because I've never experienced it. But and I am, we've talked about this before. I am sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for the loss of every other parent that is going through this. So can you tell me a little bit about the difference between feeling the grief as a parent and whether you want to, I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you to share your personal experience, but just kind of general information. How as a parent, when you're like weighted down with this grief of the loss of a child, but you still got to be a parent to a little one, because you just work with early childhood kids,
right?
So how do parents even know how to deal with this from, as now having to continue to parent a child?
I say that when you are a bereaved parent having to raise the bereaved siblings, you are trying to do at the same time the two hardest roles that you could ever be asked to do. I mean, under the best of circumstances, parenting isn't easy. It's very tough to do well. And grieving, of course, is really hard to do no matter what your grief is. And when you need to do both of those things at the same time, it can be just really overwhelming. And for me, because I was in that early childhood field, when my daughter said, "Mommy, half of me is gone," I knew that was a true statement in the sense that those early formative years are when their identity is formed. And her identity was as a sister to David. And now David was gone. And who was she? And she had to grow up with half of her gone. And so because I was in that area and was so attuned to her, that really, some people have asked me what was the hardest thing about losing your son. And my own loss, of course, was devastating and so painful. But even worse for me was knowing that she was growing up without her brother and there was nothing I could do to give her that relationship back. And she said half of her was gone and she had her lifetime ahead of her. And it's like, no, this is not okay.
Right.
You know, my child can't grow up feeling this way. What am I going to do about it?
Right.
And I know that I help families who have a similar feeling, but because I was working already in this field, I think I took note of it in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Sure.
And that's one of the messages that is so important for me, is for families to know that these really young children, most of whom would not say what my daughter said,
sure,
are experiencing very deep grief.
Right.
We don't see it in them because they're going to play it out more than show it in other ways. But make no mistake that they are feeling it, and parents can address it. There's some common kind of misconceptions about how we handle grief. And that's kind of where I start with families to help them do these two roles together of grieving and parenting at the same time.
So that begs the question, can you share maybe one of those common misconceptions, the one that you see as the
Yes.
sort of the most common, that, and not just parents. So we're not, and this is nothing against what parents are doing. We just, what Michele and I are trying to highlight is that this is a reality for some parents, and there are people out there that have the expertise and the knowledge and the ability to help with these situations, because it's not something we plan for. It's not.
Right.
No parenting books talk about this. Like, this is what you do if a child passes away. That's a horrible thing. So what's one common experience or one common misconception that parents buy into when they're dealing with a grieving younger child?
And thank you for saying that, you know, we're not, that this is really for everyone. This is for any adult who would encounter a family where there's been child loss and where there are young children. And that is the feeling that we want to protect these young children from the pain of it, from the loss of it. We want to protect them from what they might be triggered to feel, and we want to protect them from what we as adults are feeling because it's so painful. We don't want them to see it. And that is really the biggest mistake that adults make, because these children are feeling it anyway. I say that my daughter was a little case study from the very first night, because the first night that her dad and her brother were at the hospital, she and I were home alone. She was 15 months old, and she started wandering around the house just wailing. The sound that she was making was inhuman. She was just distraught. She knew something awful was happening, and she didn't understand it. I would go try to comfort her, and she'd push me away and throw herself on the floor. So from the beginning, we said, okay, the four of us are in this together. We're not going to have her. We lived in a cul-de-sac. Lots of people who would have loved to have taken care of her, but we took her to the hospital with us a lot and let her be with the family a lot. That was important for her to be able to have that relationship with her brother, feel secure because she was with the whole family, and have an understanding of what we were going through. And we met a lot of families who said, oh, we wouldn't have our other kids here. We don't want them in the hospital. We don't want them to, experience this. And I think it was one of the most helpful things we did for my daughter. She knew when her brother died that he died. We talked about the word died. We gave her that vocabulary word, even though I choked on having to say my son died. We talked with her, let her see us when we were sad, talked to her about her own sadness, and just went through it as a family. So the tips that I, give parents is, you're not going through it separately from your child. It's either my grief or theirs. It's your grief as a family, and just talk about it. We all miss David right now. When do you miss David the most? talk about it, mention his name, have memories, and involve the child in that. It's the most healing way that you can respond to this.
And that only makes sense, and thank you for sharing that, because, and again, no judgment against parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, because they're doing what they think is right. But just imagine if, say, your spouse passes away and then you just pretend that person never existed, or nobody talks about the spouse, or nobody, you're not allowed to express sorrow or grief or loss. You have to pretend everything's fine. We wouldn't recommend other adults do that. So it makes sense that we would not want to restrict our children from sharing that, sharing their feelings and sharing their grief and working it out and dealing with it. So,
and there are all kinds of grief, including divorce. And so, that's the other important thing. And that was the thing my husband and I were very, we talked about it, and we were very conscious about the fact that, she was going to spend time with each of us. We were going to talk about each other, in an open way. If she was sad about her dad not being there, I would talk with her about it. I would recognize that as a grief because her father was gone. She missed him. She loved him. And her life as she knew it was no longer there.
Right.
And grief is our response to losing something. It's a normal, natural response. We may lose a person, or we may lose a way of life. And all of that is grief. And so to really acknowledge it, I also help parents recognize how to honor a child's grief, because sometimes we want to make them feel better. That's kind of the first thing we want to do. They don't have to feel better. They're not going to feel better. It's normal to not feel good when someone you love is missing, has died, or moved out. And so to try to make them forget about it and feel better is not helpful. To say, yes, I know this really hurts right now, but, we'll get through it. I know you can handle it. I'm going to help you get through this. We'll get through this together. Those kinds of messages that say it's normal to feel bad now. So all of that, I think, is just important. And like you say, adults are well-meaning when they try to protect kids from this, but you're leaving kids alone with very real feelings that they need for adults to help them understand and validate for them.
And I want to say, as a past elementary school teacher, I taught grade 1 and 2, first and second grade. And, when there was a death in a family, kids talk about that a lot at school, kindergarten, play school, after school activities. They want to talk about it. They want to talk about the loss. And so if your kids, if your children, I think, are able to express their stuff and express their feelings and feel comfortable, I think that really helps them have the language, have the words, have the ability to talk about that, because they are going to talk about it to everybody. Well, most children. I wouldn't say some kids are going to shut down, not going to talk, but others are going to talk to a lot of people about it.
And one of the things that, I was just going to say quickly, one of the things that happens with children is that a loss in their lives becomes a big elephant in the room for a lot of different reasons, because adults don't want to talk about it if the child isn't bringing it up, and the child probably, at home isn't necessarily going to bring it up. And also, they want to shield kids from it. One of the things that I have put together is for families to a sheet for families to give to their surviving child's teacher that says, our child may talk about, Deanna may talk about her brother David. He died of cancer. This is what happened. This is what we want you to know. And if she talks about him, please talk about him with her, just to normalize it and because the adults don't always know what's okay to say. We're really afraid of saying the wrong thing.
Exactly. So, and I love that idea of being proactive, going to the school, having that sheet, especially for the younger ones, because they're not going to be able to express themselves. Whereas if you as the parents just go have that, I love that idea. That would be really, and as a teacher, I would have really appreciated to have those sheets at different times. Yeah. Because you don't know what to say, because you don't want to say something the family hasn't said.
Right.
You know, some families have different religious beliefs around what happens after death. And, you know, I can recall in my classroom, for example, we had, you know, quite a heated discussion about whether people that died went to heaven, because some kids were raised with a faith base where heaven was, you know, heaven was the place you went. Other kids were, you know, we had kids from various cultures where that wasn't what happens after death. You're reborn, reincarnated.
Yeah.
You know, you go to different places or you don't go to any place. So it was a lot of debate in the classroom, and it was actually quite enlightening to hear these little people talking about this. But I was never sure, was I crossing, you know, having these conversations, am I crossing a line? So
yeah, especially as a teacher, because, you know, there are other families and other parents who don't, with young children, classmates' parents may not want it to be talked about. Right. And so there's a lot of educating around, you know, how we handle grief and what's really okay for kids, and just any adult, whether it's a teacher or the parent themselves, that can be equipped with, you know, some good information that can normalize it for everybody, I think is just really helpful.
Yeah. So that's one, we kind of went off tangent there.
Yeah.
You know, we do that. So,
we do.
So that was one really good. I just want to kind of bring us back to where we started that the one concept is that you should protect your child and not talk about it. Whereas what you're saying is, you know, age appropriate conversations for the child, and normalizing the fact that, you know, that the sibling is deceased, has died. I want to ask you specifically about that language, because and I know we've had a previous conversation about this, and I found it really enlightening. We have so many euphemisms for death. Is that why is it important to have children understand that died is the word to use? He hasn't passed on,
right?
Gone to heaven. He hasn't, you know, it's got, you know, there needs to be a clear explanation of death and what it is. Why is not use those nicey terms that we use?
Well, thank you so much for asking that. That's such an important question, because we do feel like, well, kids don't need to be exposed to death. It's such a horrible thing. The thing is, to a child, it's just another vocabulary word. They don't have all the baggage. When Deanna would say my brother died, she didn't choke on it the way that I would when I would say my son died. I really had to get used to saying that.
Well, lots of information and lots of really good tips and strategies if you or someone you know is facing this horrific situation. I do think that it's important to highlight a few of the things that Michele said. And it's not, yes, the grief and the loss is going to be there, but if you are parents and if you are spouses, you're going to need to be able to move forward. And I think that's one of the positive messages, that there are ways to honor your child. There are ways to honor your family. And there's definitely ways that we can avoid common parenting mistakes when this sort of unfortunate situation happens within a family. So I'd like to highlight 3 of the things that Michele and I talked about. And I'd be happy to hear any other comments or any other strategies or suggestions you have in the chat. So the first thing that I think Michele pointed out that is really important is that young children do experience grief, but it's going to look different than what older children, teens, or adults experience. So there is that sense of loss. I mean, children realize, even young children, even infants and toddlers are aware of the people in their surroundings who are there all the time. And then suddenly when that person is gone, there is a difference within the family, within the environment, and within that space. So grief in younger children typically tends to manifest through changes in their play, changes in their behavior, maybe regression. They may have been toilet trained, they may have been speaking, and then during the loss and grief time, they may go back to, baby talk, or not being, problems with toilet training. They may struggle with that. And adults may expect that if kids aren't talking about it, if kids aren't, expressing themselves and saying they're sad, that may not be the case. So please keep in mind that it probably is the case. And we just have to be aware for those possibly very subtle changes in our kids. And again, we don't need to, doesn't mean that they necessarily need to have any huge interventions, but we do need to be prepared to support them and help them as they move through this time in their life. And the second point that Michele talked about, and I really believe in this, is that parents have to be open and honest, and they need to involve kids in the conversation about what death and dying and the loss of a family member is. And it's different. Of course, there's cultural beliefs, there's religious beliefs, and nobody is suggesting you should go against those. But a lot of kids are very shielded from this, and it becomes more challenging for them to then accept things. If you've never experienced or been exposed to honest conversations about what loss and grief looks like, and you're in your 20s when you first experience that, it is going to be a very different experience than a child who has been aware that death is a part of the circle of life. Not to quote the Lion King here, but it really is a part of that. I grew up on a farm, so we knew about death with animals, and within my family. Unfortunately, I lost my grandfather when I was quite young. I lost my mother in my before I was 20. So there are these things that can happen in life that are natural, and we shouldn't shy away from talking to children about them in an age appropriate and very conscious manner. And the last point that Michele brings about, which I think is so positive for parents, is that supporting kids through grief really is a community effort. So talk about how can you find ways to support this conversation. Sometimes the parents themselves have not experienced a lot of loss in their life. So maybe having a grandparent, maybe having a religious leader, maybe having a therapist, and a child-focused therapist, a pediatric therapist. Maybe it is, involving your children in a grief support group for kids that may be within your community. And these resources and services are not always the first thing that gets talked about. So be sure to reach out, ask if those kind of things are in your community. And I even know of some online grief support groups for children and families. So please access those services when you can, because as a parent, it's going to make it easier for you to share this information in these extremely difficult conversations with your kids. But also it's going to help your young children understand what death is and be able to process the grief so that they can move forward in their future as well. Thanks for sharing your time with me on Undoing We. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to share it with a friend, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you're looking for some more support, be sure to grab my guide, 5 Strategies for Better Communication During Divorce and Other Life Transitions. The link is going to be in the show notes. And remember, no matter what you do today, do something special for your